19th century 3-pounder. So this would fire a 3-pound cannonball. I don't know if you ever thought, how much powder does it take? But generally it was half the weight of the cannonball. So 3-pounder would take 1.5 pounds of black powder. And to give you an idea how much that is, this is a 1-pound container, so take 1.5 of these. And if we fired that much right now, our ears would be ringing for weeks to come. So I just use a fraction of the amount, and I have learned that 3 heaping tablespoons gives you plenty of bang for the buck. So instead of putting it down the barrel, which is the proper method, I'll use this funnel, put it directly into the back of the cannon through the touch hole. And the purpose of the touch hole, once they loaded the cannon, they put a small ring of powder around it. And when they ignited that ring of powder, physics happened. It created a vacuum in the touch hole, and it would suck all the sparks in, and that's what would set it off. I've lost count. That was 2? Oh, okay.
Oh my God. Yeah, she cooks.
Oh, good. I do too. I'm a cooking fiend. My wife says if I get any more gadgets, I'm gonna have to leave. We got the Instant Pot lately.
I know.
And I got a sous vide circulator.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite.
Man, I made some salmon the other night. She's like, okay, you can keep that. So immediately after firing first tool, they used was called the sponge, and it was usually an absorbent cloth, and they dunk it in a bucket of water, run it down the barrel to put out any sparks before they added more powder to it. They'd use another cleaning tool next, and because of the shape of the head here, they called this the worm. But it worm ends in these 2 points, and they turn it clockwise as it went down the barrel, and that snagged wadding or debris. They'd put in a packet of powder, push it to the back with the ramrod, a quick pick through the touch hole would puncture the packet. They'd put in the cannonball, again use the ramrod, and then the final tool used was called the boot de fuego, the fire stick. This rope is match cord or slow match. Treated with potassium nitrate, it burns slowly, at about 1 foot an hour. And they use it not only on the cannons, but the original muskets as well. Pointy piece is in case you have to retreat. You'll be leaving your cannons behind for the enemy to use against you. So first they give the order to spike the cannon, and they jam that tip into the touch hole and snap it off, which would make it temporarily unusable. All right, we're ready to go, and if you youngins want to cover your ears, you're kind of side to the barrel, you're going to feel a little pressure blast as well. Here we go. Attention! Sopla en punto fuego! Listo! Fuego! Yeah, there we go. Normally I wait till we're standing in front of these materials, but it's so cold out there, I'll go ahead and mention it here. And one of those materials makes up the exterior walls of this house, and it's called tabby. Tabby is your basic concrete mixture, and it's purified sand, water, and lime. We don't have gravel in Florida, so they use whole shells to serve as that aggregate and filler, and it'll be poured into forms. Now these walls are good and thick, and then they plastered over, which is a good idea. Tabby is very rough, and the shells can be razor sharp. And then another material much like it is coquina, which is the Castillo de San Marcos, the stone fort across the street is made out of that. It's only one of 2 forts in the world made out of that material, and the other one's Fort Matanzas down at Matanzas, San. But how it is made, Mother Nature takes crushed shell, sand, and limestone, and then compresses it in underground fields for hundreds of thousands of years. Spanish went through 9 wooden forts before they started building that one. And by the 1660s, they had found this underground field of the coquina on the island. They started a quarry. In 1672, they began construction of the stone fort, and it took them 23 years for the first phase of construction. And even before that, it was a fully functional fort. And then they had a second phase of construction, which was an additional 18 years. They did not realize as they were building it what an excellent material it was for a fort. But because of the loose makeup of the coquina, when it's hit with a cannonball, it will not crack or break or chip. And in a couple of instances, they talk about how a cannonball bounced off, which I would pay any money to see their expressions when that happened. But mostly what happens is the cannonball drills right into the wall. And those walls are thick. At the base, 14 to 16 feet thick, getting gradually smaller as they go up. So it's not going to go all the way through. And the only damage is the hole as the cannonball goes in. There's no cracking around that hole or anything. So it's almost an indestructible fort when you're talking about cannonballs. And this leads to a very interesting part of our history dealing with the Africans. In 1692, 14 slaves escaped from the English colonies and showed up in St. Augustine. These were the first 14. And they asked for sanctuary, and they said something that was just meant so much to the Spanish, they wrote it down and it's in the records. They said, we want to learn the one true way, we want to be Catholic. And when you're dealing with the Catholic Spanish, that's the way to go. And
Say that again, say that again.
we want to learn the one true way, we want to be Catholic.
Oh, Catholic.
King Charles II, very devout. And when he heard that, he had a document drawn up, and we know it as the Edict of 1693. And if you look into this, there's an Edict of 1692, something totally different. But this is 1693. And it stated slaves who escaped from the English colonies, made their way to St. Augustine, could get their freedom if they became Spanish citizens, took Spanish names, became Catholics, and if the males served in the military. And by this way, the Spanish could build up the population base here, build up the military strength, and just as important in their eyes was the damage it was incurring on the economy of the English colonies. And it did. It did a number on it. So much so that Carolina Governor James Moore led a 51-day siege against St. Augustine, and the sole purpose was to put an end to this practice. When the town came under attack, the entire population would move into that stone fort. So that was the focus of the attack for 51 days. And they were doing minimal damage with their cannon shots because of the makeup of the walls. In a couple of instances, when it was a dark night, the Spanish even came out of the fort, repaired the holes in the walls. It was a whitewashed fort, and they put fresh coat over the repair they made. And they're just doing a little psychological warfare, because when the sun comes up in the morning, the English go and see what kind of damage they've done. It's a pristine fort. So, really just kind of messing with the head, kind of like They gave up after 51 days and they abandoned the attack, but before that happened, one of his officers wrote in his records, we cannot hurt the fort with cannon fire. It's like sticking a hot knife in a brick of cheese. 1728, there was another attack on St. Augustine by the English because of this practice. Another failed attempt. In 1738, so many slaves that escaped made their way to St. Augustine that the Spanish built another fort known as Fort Mose. And it was 2 miles north of the stone fort. There's an incredible museum that they put on that property. But this was the fort manned by the African militia. And this community grew around it called Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose. And it was populated mainly by escaped slaves who had originally come from 4 regions of West Africa. It was destroyed 2 years after that. And then they built another one 12 years later on a different bit of land. But in 1740, General James Oglethorpe launched an attack not only on St. Augustine, but on Spanish Florida in general. He destroyed a couple of other forts, he damaged the Spanish mission system, and then he set his focus on St. Augustine for a 28-day siege. And this was another failed attack, but it was during this particular attack the English gave our stone fort a nickname. They called it the fort that eats cannonballs. In 1763, when England took over Florida, the Africans here could not remain. They'd be taken back into slavery. And that's why they went with the Spanish and the Timucua to Cuba. But getting to the house, built in 1740 by Antonio de Mason, member of the Shore Guard. He'd later work his way up to being an accountant with the Royal Treasury. His house was not this big. When you get all the way up front, first floor is open for you to check out, second floor is offices and stuff. But when you get all the way up to the front facing St. George Street, the room to the left, and then the room to the right, the one to the right was the original home. Just that one room house, and it was crowded. He was married, they had 4 daughters and 3 sons, so he had 9 people living out of this house. But I'll let you guys wander around, check it out. So our blacksmith shop, and the Spanish called the man who worked here the herrero or forjador. That term we use, blacksmith, comes from the metal used, iron, the black metal, and then smith comes from the old word smite, which means to hit or strike. Give you an idea what's involved time-wise. One of our blacksmiths made this S-link chain from there to there. He knocked it out from start to finish in a little less than 8 hours. As a comparison, he went on to make an anchor chain, the exact same length, but this one took him over 3 weeks to make. And obviously size had a lot to do with that. And then he had to forge weld each one. That takes a lot of time. But when you bend the link around the other where those ends touch, it's a weak point in the chain. You can't leave it there, so he forge weld that one particular link, turning it into a solid piece of iron. Part of the blacksmith shop is our forge. Ours is a Mediterranean style. They utilized a twin bellows system called concertina bellows. And they're made out of leather and wood anchored to the ground. Every time you pump these bellows, air gets forced into a hollow box under the fire, and its only escape is straight up to the fire. Heats it up really quick, and then when the iron's throwing arms, then it's time to take out and start working on the anvil. But to maintain the heat needed to work iron all day long, someone had to do this all day long. So rarely was it a one-man occupation. You could have more than one tradesman per shop. Blacksmith would definitely have his family in here working. But the main labor force came from boys in town that they would take on as apprentices. And the apprenticeship for the Spanish generally lasted 10 to 12 years. So they'd start those boys as young as 8 years old. I got some projects going on. Check the heat on them in just a second. But one of them, iron was very precious, so they rarely use it for something frivolous. But I'm sure at some point when they have a little scrap of something, he could make a toy. So I made a snake last week, and I like how it turned out. Especially when you put it down on a surface, you can really see the movement, the way it wiggles and stuff. The only problem was, as you can see, I twisted the tail there. Here's a bigger example of that. But if you get it hot enough, you just anchor your bottom end in the vise, and then you use tongs to twist it. So I was going for the rattlesnake thing, but the problem is there's not enough material here to make that diamond-shaped head that a poisonous snake would have. So I'm making another one right now, and I actually flattened out the head longer, twice as long, and I folded it over, and I'm going to see if I can work that so it'll give me enough material so I can get that diamond-shaped head out of it. See if I got a temperature I can work. So I'm still flattening it out. If I was a little more skilled, I would actually forge weld the two pieces so they become one. But I'm just going to leave it folded over like that. It'll still work. So all I'm doing right now is flattening it out. On the front, I don't want it as wide as the back, so I'll kind of keep it narrow. Just got to tell the iron what you want out of it. As it cools down, it gets darker. You also notice a change to the sound. And so now it's probably a little too dark to work. If I was working continuously on it, I'd stick it back in, about a minute and a half on those bellows and bring it up to that glowing state. Got a thicker piece in here. See if I got good heat on that. But I'm making a knife out of a railroad spike. And this is a popular thing for beginners and novices to make knives out of these. It is a steel. It's not a real good quality steel. So these knives, even though they look cool, they don't hold an edge. As you can see how it's already got that kind of knife shape to it. I just started working on that and just hammering on the blade right now. And it's so thick, it's just a lengthy process. So it's going to take me a couple of dozen heatings. But as I work it, where the blade will be, it extends out and it extends wide as well. And then just from here back, that'll be the handle. And I'll probably make a twist handle out of that. And then you've got the head of the spike makes a great pommel, just a natural thing. Last one I made, it turned out really good, but I tried to do a skull head in the pommel and ended up looking like a monkey. And I was like, yeah, that'll do, that'll work. You can judge the temperature of the iron by color and brightness. So we got a great heat on this one. We're probably 1800 degrees or hotter. And by virtue of the fact I can hold it down here while it's that hot up there, shows you iron does not conduct heat like other metals. I wouldn't want to get any closer out of it. This is square stock, and though it's not a real thick piece where it's black, it's very strong metal. But then you get down here where it's glowing orange like that, and it's just so super malleable, so you can work it, twist it, shape it, flatten it, cut it. As you saw with those other two, you really don't have a long time to work it. That railroad spike will give you the longest time just because it's so thick. Generally, a piece of square stock like this, I find, you get about 45 seconds to put hammer work in before you have to put it in. And that's why blacksmiths always had multiple projects going on. One cools down, slip it in, take another one out, work in, take it out, take another. But you don't want to have too many, because if you overheat your iron, you can damage the metal. And if you get it hot enough, it'll start welding to other pieces. And that's where we get that term, he's got too many irons in the fire. Another one we have, strike while the iron's hot. That comes from the blacksmith shop. Rust is an issue, and they had a way to slow the oxidation process, much like seasoning an iron skillet. And I did my steak when I finished it last week. So what you do is when you finish a project, let it cool completely down, take a stiff wire brush to it or take it to a grinder, and then you put it on top of the fire for 3 to 5 minutes. Get it hot, but nowhere near as hot as this. And then they would apply either linseed oil or beeswax to it. And the expanded pores in the hot metal would draw on a surface layer, and that would help keep the moisture out. Right now, this is way too hot to be putting anything on, and it's a good example of why it's now in its most dangerous state. When it's glowing orange, you know not to touch it. Now it's the same color here as down there where I can hold, yet it still has that extreme temperature. And the Spanish translated, they had a term for that, they called it the black heat. There's no iron ore in the ground in La Florida, so it was all shipped over from Spain. And it's such an important trade that when Menendez came, part of his cargo was 60 tons of iron, half ton of steel. Even with the rough crossing I told you about, he got here with over 800 men, and 8 of them were skilled, experienced blacksmiths. One of his officers actually wrote up a list that is still in existence to this day of the trades and how many members of the trade that he brought. My favorite, he only brought one of these guys, but he was as important enough to bring all the way across the Atlantic. He brought one beer maker with him. Watchtowers, of course, very important for the security, but you had to be careful where you put them, because if they were too much in the open, it would become a billboard showing your enemy where you're located. And I told you Sir Francis Drake attacked in 1586. That's how he found this settlement. He had a small, or not a small, a very large, over 2,000 men, and it was like 23 military ships, 19 auxiliary vessels. But they were sailing up the coastline in the Carolinas. As they went by, they saw a watchtower and came to investigate and found a Spanish settlement. England and Spain were always at war, but he had a fanatical hatred of the Spanish on top of that. And they attacked to everything of value. His nickname was the Dragon. He lived up to that by burning St. Augustine. We got our leatherworking shop. Next to that, the Armadillo, the armory. I'm going to go get one of the guns to show you guys. Hang on just a second. This was popular for, which is gun of the hut, but it was popular for Europeans in the late 1600s through much of the 1700s. It is a flintlock. It locks the various firing mechanisms you find on the sides of those muskets. Earliest for Europeans, and we're going well back into the 1400s, is the matchlock. Spanish called it the arquebus, and the same burning rope I used to fire the cannon, you'd attach it to this apparatus on the gun, and pulling the trigger bring the burning rope down on the black powder. That's what would fire it off. This one is fired by spark. And if you're not familiar with how the flintlock works, your first step is to put in your black powder. Charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter. You follow that up with wadding, which could be paper or cloth. Drop in the cannonball. The ramrod tucked in under the barrel. Pack it in really good. Then we put a little more powder here. This is called the pan. And there's a tiny hole in the barrel, the vent hole, for the spark to get through. What generates the spark? Your flint and your steel. That steel piece, called the frizzen, goes over the powder. This leaf spring gives it the right resistance. Another leaf spring on the inside of the mechanism gives the hammer its torque. Flint hits the steel, creates the spark that sets it off. In battle, the Spanish had 31 steps. The preparation, loading, firing of the gun, each step conducted at the same time on command. Yet they could still fire their guns twice a minute. And that's about the same average for the cannons as well. But one of them was to clear away the residue that black powder leaves. And they just run their index finger up under their flint to clear off any from the last time they fired it, and their thumb up the frizzen. I'm going to put in earplugs because I'm in the close proximity to explosions way too much. And this will be loud. If you want to cover your ears, please do. I'm going to step over this way. Fire in the hole! Musket going off. Here we go. Full cock. Point! Fuego! Not only is that the best part of the job, thank you very much, guys.